meeting or this webinar today is being recorded, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to Brent to get started.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much for also attending today. I certainly appreciate it. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Brent Hoover. I run the Aiken area SBDC here on USCA's campus. In addition here today, well, hopefully it's in relation to cybersecurity. As you see, we're looking at protecting your business value. So through today's topic, not only are you going to hear a little bit about what we do at SBDC, you're going to learn more about the fundamentals of cybersecurity. CMMC, particularly we're looking at the focus of level 1. As Sarah said, this webinar is being recorded. If you haven't noticed, you don't have the capability for video or audio in this case from your end. However, I strongly encourage you to submit your questions via chat. That can do anytime throughout the webinar, and by the end, at the conclusion, we will look at those questions and be happy to take them. I will put a disclaimer out there. I am not a cybersecurity expert. I don't pretend to be. What we are doing here at SBDC is making sure that clients understand basic cyber hygiene and why it's important to protect the value that you've created throughout the inception of your company. So I figure I wanted to put that out there as well. Let's go ahead and get started, shall we? So what's our agenda? As I mentioned, we're going to talk about who we are, get into the basics, look at CMMC, particularly level 1, and hopefully have a good conclusion. Now throughout there, we'll have sporadic slides, regarding what are some common threats that are being faced, some simple startup processes that are put together, etc. So who are we at SBDC? I'm sure if you're on this call, you're familiar with what we are with our mission, and that is to promote local businesses across the state. We're here to help you create your business, grow them, and let's say if you were deciding to sell it, close it, etc., we also assist through that process. The main thing is that we are no cost service and we're confidential. We're funded by the Small Business Administration. In addition, also too, we're funded by the state of South Carolina, and particularly like our local office, we're funded by Aiken County. Now you see access to valuable resources. Well, what entails in said valuable resources? That's a plethora of options. We can do cash flow management. I've put together templates that have allowed for that. So we can do data modeling, etc. We can help you build a business plan. We can help you get the loan package. And also too, as we're seeing here with cybersecurity, there are other elements such as marketing, etc. So those are a wide spectrum, right? That you have access to as an SBDC client. It's not going to cost you anything if you decide to register as one. Naturally, we offer an educational component for the training workshops. That's why you're here today. So we're going to continually do these webinars. Since COVID, we have transitioned to the world of online for the moment. That's what we're staying at. In the future, we may go to various hybrid models, but the end result is still the same, educating you and your business about topics that are important to most small businesses. Now, in addition to our general scope of services, right, we do have specialized programs. Well, we're here today for the cybersecurity element, hence the CAP being the first element that you see on the screen. In addition to that, we also assist with exporting. We have export specialists from Charleston up into the Greenville area. Not to mention, we have government contracting. That's something our local office assists with regarding the certifications. My office helps plenty of times with woman-owned small business certification, 8A, Vets First, Hub Zone, you name it. We also have specialists that can assist you further with determining perhaps what should be your burden rate, what to look for, how to actually put together an RFP, capability statements, etc. And of course, we do have a component that focuses on technology and product commercialization, perhaps if you're interested in the SBIR programs and such. Once again, we consider ourselves one of the best kept secrets of South Carolina. We're obviously trying to promote what we can offer to small businesses, but as you can see, it has an abundance of material that's available for you, no cost. All you gotta do is sign up as a client. And we will have contact information if you decide to do so later. Well, let's get into today's discussion, shall we? The cyber element. I figured I like to start with an equation. I mentioned I am a professor. And no, this is not the accounting equation, assets equals liabilities plus equity. Today, we're looking at it from the cyber relation. Now, I have this quote, cyber hygiene doesn't need to be rocket science. We were actually asked last month, if you didn't realize, was Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And we were doing several ads, and so they wanted some quotes from us. And I figured this was probably a good one, because I'll tell you, when you hear the word cyber, I don't know about you, but even in the back of my mind, some part of me says, oh gosh, this is going to get technical. Either it's going to be boring, I'm not going to be sure what to do. Well, I want to make it where it is simplistic in nature from a basic cyber hygiene element. This is something your business should be concerned about. So what goes into this quote unquote liability? Well, we have IP, intellectual property, and third-party data. And we're going to break up into the different forms of data. But in essence, that's really what you are protecting. You've built up your own intellectual property, whether it's a copyright, trademark, patent, or just something informal, a process that you have created. That's something that is of value, not only to you, but to your customers. And not to mention, you have third-party data that could be from your vendors, could be from your customers, it could be from even your employees. All of that needs to be protected. And if it's not protected, technically it's a liability. See, the sad reality in the world of cyber is this. You as a small business are a soft target. The hard targets, the larger companies, everybody thinks, oh, they're going to go to them because we see it in the news. Well, they have dedicated people that are working around the clock to ensure that they remain protected from a cyber front. Can you say that the same as a small business? And they know that sometimes. They know you don't have a dedicated team. I mean, I once sat in on a lecture of someone who would be the equivalent of the highest level of CMMC. That was his knowledge base. And he's told me the sad reality is this does not protect you from being hack proof. Okay. I don't think there is such thing as that. He said the closest element that you could get to it would essentially be paying $1.5 million. $1 million to set up the infrastructure, $500,000 for somebody or several people to run it around the clock. We're not saying that this is going to be hack proof. We're just saying make yourself less of a soft target. And that is the goal today. So we need to keep this in the back of our mind, because here is the question. What information does your company need? Naturally, everything in life is a trade-off between risk and reward. I mean, you see it on charts with the standard deviation, etc. But this is a great point that you see here in the red. Well, do you really need that data? See, today we're information driven. We want to get our hands on every little bit of data that we can, especially when it comes to our customers, because we want to try to produce the analytics necessary to see how can we further improve the experiences. Maybe there's an avenue that we have not exactly reached out to them about, etc. Well, that's great for potential, but the potential also has that information is suddenly released to the public. It's not supposed to be. Congratulations. We are now in a liable situation. Hence why the one word, the operative word here, must, is capitalized. Yeah, if that information is required to do business effectively, efficiently, then absolutely it needs to be as part of your databases. However, you kind of have to determine this. There is no one size fits all, but it's nevertheless the conversation we want to be stressing to you as the business owner. All right, well, let's start with some of the first fundamentals, right? You'll hear PII, you'll hear CII, etc. Essentially, when Earl Gregorich, my colleague, was helping me put this together, we decided to approach CII as the base, right? So anything that is considered to be the confidential element. Now, if you see on the second point, in terms of the types of data classification, sometimes you'll see these three, sometimes you'll see four. Occasionally, private can be broken up into two subcategories. The public data, we understand, is very straightforward. It's something that's already out there. I mean, imagine information put on a form such as the Articles of Organization with the Secretary of State, publicly available. Okay, that's not a threat to us. When you look into the private, I guess sometimes you may see four types of data. They'll classify them into two subcategories. One is regarding, like, say, your internal memos, emails you're sending to perhaps your colleagues, your boss. And the other is what we're getting into more of the quote unquote confidential data, right? Could be dealing with your customers, vendors, etc. And of course, there is the restricted data. Normally what you'll see on textbook definition of restricted data is this something that is offering potential criminal or civil fines of a great magnitude if this were to be released. Imagine too anything in accordance with federal guidelines, etc. Now, the PII is probably what we're going to focus a little bit more on today, because the South Carolina statute actually revolves around PII. Now, you'll notice too, like with PCI compliance, you'll see CUI for the controlled and classified information. if you're getting into the world of government contracting, you'll see that the difference between controlled information versus classified, right? And some of you may have access to HIPAA records. Yes, those do need to be protected further. So any of these could naturally revolve around the CII Foundation. But we wanted to start with you with an overview. Now, I was looking around, talking to either some people who had been hacked in the past, and also looking at several polls across third-party websites. So we were trying to determine what is the average cost financially of cyber damage. So if you see here, you've got a range. You got 38,000, you got 250,000. One of the websites, I believe it was Insurance, said 38,000 is typically the average cost for a micro business, right? Now, when we were also talking with some contacts with Fort Gordon, they threw out, well, 250 is probably more of an accurate average description. Whether or not you fall on the minimum or the maximum schedule, remember, this is not even a maximum. This is just looking at averages, right? Hence the asterisk. But even if you fall between these two parameters, do you have cash flow sitting around in maybe an account called reserves that would be sufficient enough to handle the financial damage of a cyber incident involving your company? Somehow I'm going to doubt that. Now, if you are, congratulations. But even so, would you want to have a better use for that reserve fund than perhaps paying out for the financial damage of a cyber fallout? So we want to actually give you perspective. This is not a scare tactic. That is one thing we have been very adamant about. We do not want to use that for cyber, but we do need to give you at least an understanding of what happens from a cash flow perspective. What we're far more focused on is seeing how we can better protect. Now, once again, we were able to identify some metrics in regarding to what specific types of damages typically occur with businesses. Now, this came from more of what we would see. They could theoretically be classified by small business under the SBA, but the larger businesses, you know, things that are IPO, because you'll notice stock price drop, initial public offering, things that are publicly traded. This is not acting up to 100%. The whole idea behind this was to see in said poll which one had the most weight or impact. And as you can see here, well, we'll start at the bottom, right? So we've got customer trust lost. Well, clearly we don't want that. If without our customers, we're not going to be in business long. You notice intellectual property theft was coming up in 19%. Ooh, somebody in the leadership team was thrown out, perhaps had a replacement, another 19%. Now, this one clearly is dealing with things that are publicly traded, 20% stock price drop. And as you can see, of course, reduced confidence in business. If you've been noticing, you know, anything with the stock market generally is driven around the news, right? Good or bad. In this case, clearly it was not positive. But the main or the primary factor here in terms of the strongest weight was the operational disruption. And as you know, the old phrase goes, time is money. So yes, that is going to have a financial impact nonetheless. So what if we told you that for the cyber hygiene, the basic levels, if you spent the equivalent of $500, give or take, you would be in good standing for what is now going to be known as the level 1 of CMMC. And to guess what? That's basically the truth. Now, please understand, this is not an exact science, right? Things are going to change based on how large your business is, the scope of what you're doing. But once again, I stress from my quote, this is not rocket science. So what are some of the elements that could come into play here? How do those damages typically occur? Well, I mean, you've seen these across the points. I mean, from employees to ransomware, phishing, brute force. People always forget your employees are supposed to be your human capital assets. Well, that's great, but sometimes they're not properly trained to handle cyber threats. And those threats can take a multitude of options, right? So the new one we're seeing these days is with ransomware. I mean, you've seen that from, I believe it was the Buffalo school system to the pipelines to financial. I think on the last case I was looking at, they negotiated down, what was it, a fee of $40 million. So think about it like the pirates of old. Except in this case, they're taking your information hostage. So in those scenarios, that's quite a predicament to find your business in, okay? It's a new and growing pattern of a cyber threat. If we were to culminate all these elements like viruses, worms, Trojan horses, right, we would essentially find ourselves under the umbrella of malware, right? But if you notice in these cases, we're not seeing the virus, we're not necessarily seeing the worm, the Trojan horse, etc. A lot of these are typically dealing with the human element. And yes, we want to be protected against the others, such as virus and such. We're going to show you how that actually relates into CMMC Level 1. But the point I'm making out of here, whether it's phishing, right? So imagine that could take the form of email spoofing, social engineering, etc. Someone is having a misleading email, so you click on it, maybe they claim to be your boss, you activate that link, and congratulations. They maybe even want, I've seen in some cases they say to enter your password, and people actually do, and congratulations, you just gave them the tools to go to war with your company on a cyber front. That's not where you want to be. And of course, brute force, right? So imagine someone trying to lock people out. They're typing in passwords all over the place, and occasionally that can occur. And those scenarios, you don't want to have a denial of service, so to speak, with your business. These all the threats, no, but they are still the common ones that we see today. And if you notice, once again, they revolve around the human element. So training yourself and training your employees, anyone who's dealing with your information, is probably a good idea. So how does this relate to us? Well, we dug around in terms of the South Carolina statutes, and we found the specific one. We consulted with an attorney to verify that this was indeed the one governing. And yes, what you see here is SC Title 39-1-90. So what does this specific statute say? Well, it revolves back to that discussion around the PII, personally identifiable information. So if you're a company, right, you have access to PII, most likely it's probably on your customers. What they're saying is, in the case of a cyber incident where that information is leaked, hacked, etc., the first and last name combined with factors such as the obvious credit card information, bank accounts, but even occasionally some of them are not that self-explanatory. Think about it. Even technically, your driver's license number, if you read the statute, falls under that case. That gets linked together with the first and last name. Congratulations, we're going to have some issues. We are now in a liable position. So the statute, if you want to dig into further, they're telling about you need to notify the individuals who have been affected. So you can either do that by calling them directly. It mentions the email use, mentions you can put on your website, etc. Some companies too, after cyber attacks, they'll put up an FAQ page to go a step further. Normally you want to do this as soon as possible, naturally within 30 days. And if you dig even further into the statute, it says, like, look, those who are affected can seek civil damages regarding this. They can recover attorney fees, costs. I believe if it was over 1,000 individuals affected, you had to notify the Consumer Affairs for the department. Now that's in relation to, it uses an operative word there, and it says the resident. But even so, it says if you are maliciously, you willfully know that you are in violation of this, you don't care. Well, in that case, I was reading through it even earlier today, and was saying $1,000 per resident in that case. I mean, shoot, you suddenly have 10 residents who are affected. Congratulations, $10,000 fine. I don't know about you, but I'm not looking forward if I had to pay that. So one of those things is just making you aware of what's being governed under South Carolina law. Earl Gregorich, my colleague, he's actually put together a really good PDF, a booklet, so to say, about kind of the highlights of this law further. So if you're interested, feel free to email me and we can get you a copy of that. That's what we're disseminating out to the public, but we wanted to make you aware of it today. So let's start simple, right? I told you this isn't rocket science. Okay, before we even get into the CMMC model, normally we preface this with some occasional fundamentals even further. And I mean, none of them are exactly complicated. We'll say, we don't say auto connect to networks that we don't know. When we are done with a network, we forget it, right? Because when you are connecting, say, for the Wi-Fi, it will ask you, do you want to remember this network? Do you want to actually remove the information? You can do so. One of the things I think that's very ironic today is the HTTP versus HTTPS, right? So we're getting into the hypertext transfer protocol. Now, you notice the S is the unique thing, it's the secure factor. And a lot of web browsers, Firefox included with the new versions, it'll even tell you, hey, if you go into an HTTP website, it'll actually stop you before you get there and say, look, does this need to be up converted? Do you want to go back, etc. We want to make sure the information that we're putting through on that site is actually secure. You'll notice most web browsers will actually give you the lock to show you, is this actually HTTPS? VPNs, virtual private networks. Yes, they are your friends, as I say on the slide. Are you offering another veil of protection with your network? And speaking of the network, I told you common threats can be the human elements. What's going on with the parental controls? So I got blacklist in there in the bold, but really there's blacklist versus whitelist, right? So one's telling you that you're going to either say, I'll ban sites by default, or the other will say, I got to do it manually, right? So if we were going to ban systems, I mean, sites in this case, right? If we wanted to go in manually, we'd equivalent to be doing blacklist, right? We're telling it, hey, always block this site. But until otherwise, it's fair game. Now, I'm sure if you were working, say, like with a nuclear power plant, federal facility, everything's probably going to be blocked by default unless it is specially told this one that you will get access to, going the equivalent of whitelisting, et cetera. To which extreme you go, well, that's entirely up to you, but it is something for the business to consider nonetheless. I mean, I remember I was talking to a business that was a computer repair store, and they were saying, yeah, that's one of the things they always had to put in focus, parental controls. People were trying to hack in the system, go to sites they shouldn't be going to, and they were like, that actually opens up stuff to a potential liability even further. Completely understandable. So once again, tools that are going to come with your router, going into whatever your system uses, perhaps a Genie, et cetera. And yes, what's going on the last point? Well, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. Now, most people are going to use Wi-Fi for all their needs. I mean, we've gotten away from the cord. Bluetooth is actually one of those elements that could be a potential security avenue right there. I even saw it in a case where I had a mouse connected to a computer and did a test of it. And sure enough, sometimes the mouse was actually activating the Bluetooth automatically. And I wasn't doing that on my own accord. So it's one of those, are you really needing Bluetooth for your business needs, or perhaps that's something that you could disable until it was actually needed going forward? None of this is going necessarily into understanding what's known as quote unquote geek speak, but we're starting simple. So where do we build off of that? And that's where it comes to the core of today's discussion, the CMMC, Cyber Maturity Model Certification. So as you notice here, we've got 3 levels, but there used to be 5. Thankfully, we actually got an update this week. There's going to be an upcoming webinar about the evolution. Because what we're seeing here is essentially going to be known as CMMC 2.0. Used to be 1.0. So where does this actually originate from? Well, essentially, DoD was looking at it from the element of people are working on our contracts, right? It's prime contractor, subcontractor. Wait a second here. They're going to have access to government information. Now, the government's taking this very seriously. Well, the question then remains, are the contractors and subcontractors taking that as serious? And thus they realize that actually could become a potential cyber threat in itself. We need to make sure the people that are working through actually are fully secure. Now, CMMC, once again, this is not actually something active at the moment per se. It's going through an evolution. They're doing the testing. I mean, think of this as almost like a beta version to the public. And naturally, they are upgrading to 2.0 to make it a little more user-friendly. We're going to get into the specifics of that. But once again, the idea was, hey, in the future, when you're working on a government contract, there literally may be a requirement to say, are you level 1, are you level 2, are you level 3? And if you don't have that level certified, well, you may be out of luck in that scenario. Now, the good news about CMMC is normally we're dealing with cyber, right? It's coming from what's known as, the NIST model, right? Which I'm sure is probably most of you, if you've ever dealt with anything as cyber, like, oh, okay, there's a nice model there. It's got, my various categories. And you may watch some videos on it, but how does it actually apply to you? And that's the great thing about CMMC. It is strictly going to be applicable to your cases. You can actually test it. You can enforce it. You can evaluate your performance. And so you'll notice the graphic below is just showing you various subcomponents. And we're going to talk about a few of those. Now, I've really merged these into about 3. I've taken one from like the pre-initial steps of perhaps like with your employee elements. There is one component we're going to discuss fully about the physical protection, because everybody assumes cyber does not actually include the non-cyber elements. No, that's not the case. And of course, we'll talk about actually making sure you have the proper digital framework established. So that way, from these level 1 steps, you can actually see how your company's making sure keeping things physically secure. Are we keeping our employees secure with the way they're actually managing the information? And 2, is the digital setup at least correct in compliance? All right, now I told you that 1.0 is shifted into 2.0. So I was able to actually find this great graphic coming off of one of the government websites. And of course, we naturally attributed it to, but it's able to show you what was going on in the initial model. So as I told you, level 1 is going to what's known as basic cyber hygiene. We are strongly encouraging small businesses to at least be in compliance of level 1. Now you're thinking, well, I'm not a government contractor. Why should this matter to me? Well, think about it from a marketing perspective. your business could say, hey, we're CMMC level 1 compliant. It's a nice thing. Now, the average public individual may not necessarily know what that means, but you can at least be able to show further in detail that yes, we are taking cybersecurity very seriously, and we are making sure to protect not only our information, but yours as well. And as you'll notice, the ranks went higher up. So SBDC, of course, is focusing on level 1. Level 2 was kind of a gray zone. No one had really sure who was going to take it. And then MEP in South Carolina was talking about taking levels 3 through 5. Now, if you look to the right, of course, the model's been condensed down to 3 levels. One of the great things I'm noticing too, according to the current evolution, remember, this is not set in stone yet, is doing an annual self-assessment versus having to go through a third party. But regardless, though, the level 1 pretty much hasn't changed. They've just kind of condensed down the others too. Like I said, this is not something necessarily you would even need to be certified in. But if you are a small business, being compliant perhaps on CMMC level 1 is not a bad thing to do so. All right, as I mentioned, 17 action steps, right? These aren't just things you can put on paper and say, yeah, we're CMMC level 1 compliant. No, you actually have to do these ongoing. It's like a living document, it's evolving because they're performance based. Can you go in and test them each and every day to see how well we are actually in accordance with these steps? And as I mentioned, SBDC has gotten on board with helping businesses in South Carolina focus on the level 1 action steps. As I mentioned, my colleague Earl Gregorich, he actually heads up as part of the America's SBDC Cyber Task Force. Thankfully, he's asked me to join that. I really appreciate it. But internally within South Carolina, we are part of our own tech committee team, and he's put together some great resources that I'll talk about later that actually allow you to do workbooks to actually see further how you're doing with level 1. You can continuously do this. Think about it as this is almost cyber strategic planning. You do quarterly reviews for your business normally. Well, this is just an extra step to it, an addendum to that strategic planning. Now, I'm not going to go through all the 17 steps with the text because I'm sure that probably might bore you, but what we can talk about are what all those 17 steps are actually seeking out of it. And so let's get started. I told you I broke this up into about 3 tiers, right? Call this essentially the employee setup. It's not dealing with the physical protection of this element, but it is looking to make sure that see how the employees are accessing information and making sure they have the right permissions. Now let's start at the top, passphrases. Notice, not passwords, passphrases. Hopefully we've evolved beyond having password as our password. Yeah, that's not exactly compliant. So let's talk about the passphrases, right? 12 to 15 characters minimum. We're starting to have this strong passphrase right there. Number 2, does it make sure we have all the requirements? We got uppercase, we got lowercase, we've got a digit in there, special characters, etc. Are we changing said passphrases routinely? Meaning, in this case, at the minimum, are we changing it 6 months? Most businesses you'll see these days that are very cautious are actually updating the passphrases every 3 months. 2, we never reuse the same passphrase. And this is kind of funny. I know some of you might think it's counterintuitive, but please don't write the passphrase down. And yeah, that was hilarious. Earl sent me a picture. I think he found it in Barnes and Noble. And there's a book that was being sold that had write down all your passwords, and they didn't call it passphrases, your password notebook. And so we had a chuckle about that because right now that's not to be considered the proper practice, especially if we want to be in compliance for CMMC level 1. Now you're saying, well, what do we do then? Well, that's why a lot of other steps have come into play. Not only is it just the passphrase, it's got another step of further protection, multi-factor authentication. I know it may drive you nuts, but having to get that phone call, or most of you probably use the text these days, but either way is still acting as a form of multi-factor because they know the passphrase can still be hacked, but hopefully they haven't physically gotten access to your phone. Therefore, it should block an attempt to actually get in the system and pretend to be you. But once again, looking at 12 to 15 characters, changing them at least 6 months. Don't reuse them. Don't write them down. If we need to reset them, great. We have a system to do so, and hopefully it's tied into multi-factor authentication. All right, passphrases. What about the permissions? I had mentioned the term before, and now it's becoming into application here. Job role permission. What does that really mean? It's this. Does every employee need to have admin permissions on a system? And I guess this actually brings into a sub point. And you always used to hear the old expression, bring your own beer, right? And now the new term for the technology is bring your own computer, and now it's evolved, of course, into bring your own device. Well, that in itself could become a liability if we're trying to be truly CMMC Level 1 compliant. Because here's the thing, if we give our employees, perhaps even if it's a temporary contractor, have the system already established, right? So we give them a device. We can properly set up that device, not only for the subsequent steps we're going to talk about, but also to ensuring what they can and can't do. One, probably the leadership team needs to have the admin features, right? Perhaps if we had an IT team. If we have just a random employee, they probably do not need all the access to the device and be able to change it at will that we have as the higher leadership. The reason being is, once again, it needs to have almost compartmentalization of access, right? They need to have access to literally what they can do the job. It goes back to that second slide, right? About weighing the risk versus the reward. What do they need to do to actually perform the job efficiently and effectively? Well, that's great. You need to make sure they have those components, but anything beyond that, why do they need it? I mean, I was even talking with someone with ForGorn in the past, and they said, shoot, programs that may seem harmless, why are they on there on the device if they are not needed to do the job? Get rid of them. In this case, we have the same thing when I'm dealing even with my system here at USCA. Certain things I can't even change in that case. Once again, they are establishing because they want to have compartmentalization of the access. People need access to the programs and the rights in order to actually do the job. Anything beyond that could become a potential cyber liability. Also, too, you see on the third point, exclusive network. So one of those things that may come into play here is, think about a family. You have a home-based business and you're doing all the business through home, but perhaps you got a family member as well, so you got your personal network. Probably one of those things that would be given a best practice is to have separate networks. One for the business, one for the personal. They're not intermingled if you want to be perhaps in compliance for CMMC Level 1. Once again, not rocket science, doesn't need a ton of explanation or elaboration on that, but it is saying keep these separate. Now, what about sharing too? Normally, if you want to be in compliance, keep the sharing turned off. Now, naturally, people are moving more towards the cloud, and we're going to make sure that you're actually operating on a system that is fully secure in that case with the endpoints. But you'll notice too on Macs, a lot of times you can turn the sharing on. You can share with a personal computer. Well, if you're operating from home with a business computer, it probably does not need to be sharing with the personal computer. That could be potentially a cyber liability. We're talking about logging in with passphrases. Well, hopefully every employee has their own unique login credentials, right? I thought it was hilarious. I was setting up a workshop one time, and the computer there only had a public login. And it did make me chuckle in here because technically we would be in violation of that. It's really good just to have everybody with their own unique credentials, username, they have their unique passphrase. And that way, once again, it's separating because people are probably going to have different permissions within those user accounts. And last point on here, no defaults. Something as simple as when you buy a router, change it from the factory settings, reset it, and put in your own information. I mean, if you haven't noticed, like I think one of the first routers I bought, I turned it over. I'm like, yep, it's got a built-in password. It's got the built-in network name. I mean, shoot, that network name itself is going to probably be active out there where perhaps your neighbors could search it, or whoever is adjacent to your company. Well, you probably want to have that as an unlisted network, right? Update the security settings on said network. And two, change the passphrase. Okay, because what they're going to provide you would probably qualify as a password and not a passphrase. All those action steps put together, you're having a good setup. But once again, as you can see, they're generally relating to the people at hand, getting things properly established. What have we learned from this slide? Well, it should be obvious. Strong passphrases, give them just what they need to do the job, and probably don't use their device, give them a device, right? That's a company asset. If you're a home-based business, keep company network different than the business network. Don't have it sharing with other computers that it shouldn't be. Unique credentials, and go reset those factory settings. Now, I told you this is not just cyber. There are some physical components included. So on this, we're seeing it may actually be tougher a little to enforce. This is where the training comes in and is a crucial component to your employees. Number one, destroying trash. And we really should actually define trash here. It's not normally wadding up a piece of paper, throw it in the trash can. that could be one of them, right? If it's got your critical information, that could be the PII, could be, unclassified control information, etc. Whatever component it takes. If it's actually there, we don't need it, shred it, right? Don't just throw it in the trash. But also, too, what we see here is that people will actually upgrade their systems. They'll say, hey, I don't need this laptop anymore. It was from my company. I'm just going to give it away. Has that been properly cleaned? The answer probably will be a no, okay? You want to make sure that hard drive has been wiped, that any information that could technically be considered critical has been deleted permanently. You can go to a specialist, right, who can ensure that it has been 100% wiped, and thus then you can part ways with your machinery. But a lot of times it's going to be dealing with actual files, right? So if we're not needing any more and saying, we have to keep it for, say, 2 years, we shred it, right? We want that completely destroyed. Now, what about the things that are not needing to be shredded? Make sure they're locked down. That's the case of, do you have actually a separate cabinet, perhaps for, could be a client file, could be a vendor file, etc. We even have that here with our offices, right? Within each office, we have individual set keys. So we make sure that we're having each one of those is locked down properly. Two, you'll even see, making sure that if you got a client out, you don't have the information just sitting out in front of them. Put it up, lock it away, it's done. Now you notice this track visitors. So we're talking about this from the employee perspective. Okay, everybody's got their public space. You may bring a client in and shoot your own retail. Yes, we're not talking about tracking those. Somehow I don't think that would be very good for business. They came in and you were requiring them to perhaps have a badge. Okay, what we're talking about is the access points that are not offered to the public. Perhaps you want to give somebody a tour of your facility, right? In that case, one of the best ways to do, badge them. Okay, it could be an old school badge. You could do this in a digital format, but you're keeping a log of it, right? This is the person A, they came here at this time, they left at this time B. Make sure you get back their badge. It's a good setup. It's just offering some initial benchmarks to test assure that yes, we are keeping things secure, because you don't want people going around whether or not, even if they're not malicious, it still could potentially become a liability. One of the last things is actually no different than tracking physical inventory that we may sell. We inventory our own devices. So that could be things from the key cards to the badges themselves, could all be right down to the computers. Webcams, clickers, things have a habit of walking away sometimes, and you want to make sure that they are where they're supposed to be. So it's always unique to hear from a CMMC Level 1 that there are physical steps included. But yes, let's not forget about them. All right, now I told you there's a third component, perhaps. Let's get around to the hardware and the software. So these will probably get you through each of the steps through level 1 of CMMC. Number 1, do we actually have a firewall? Most computers these days will have a built-in one. You can get a more advanced firewall. Some of the options, even such as, Norton with their 360, you can look at Cisco, etc. They will have probably a more advanced version. It's not going to break the bank, but are you actually having at least that first protection between you and your information? Simple. What about the subnetworks? This one maybe you may or may not be as familiar with, and I'll be the first to admit I'm not an expert on it at all. Really what it's showing is within your business network, perhaps either to prevent congestion because you got so many people operating on the network, you want to improve the speed, but more importantly, you actually want to enhance the security of it. You could actually set up a subnetwork. You can Google and see different options on that. It's one of those things I probably would recommend talking with a specialist ahead of time just to ensure that everything is properly established. But once again, it's showing a version of compartmentalization. In this case, not only do we improve security, we're probably going to improve the speed of said network. Auto updates. Oh yes, you probably hate that moment when the computer tells you, hey, we need to restart. You're like, ah, screw that. We're going to click not now. That's not what we actually want to occur with our devices. And this always brings up an interesting point. Earl's one of the questions he asked within the workbook is typically whether or not your operating system is still supported by its creator, because that's crucial. If it's no longer supported by it, and you'll notice this with Apple, right? Older Macs eventually get to a point where they can't upgrade the new operating system. They can do some basic maintenance on a bit of software here and there, but the core elements of the operating system, we can't upgrade any further. And probably, that's the case, they want people to buy the new things, and that's fine. But if that's the scenario and we want to be in compliance with CMMC Level 1, we should probably make sure that not only is the system still supported, but we set the updates to automatically go forward. Because there could be a chance that there's a dangerous loophole that's been exploited. The patch comes out and you're like, shoot, I'll wait till tomorrow. Well, in that case span of 24 hours, that may be too late. Have them automatically go through in that scenario. And that's something that can drive perhaps employees crazy. So manage that ahead of time. Look typically to see when these updates are going to be initiated, installed, and when restarts are required. And thus it'll allow you to actually game plan around that scheduling. If you set it auto updates, most of the time it'll be in the background, may slow the performance down just a tad while it's updating, but it sure is nice to have that security in place. What about antivirus? I mean, it's one of the most basic forms of malware out there, right? The virus, the self-replication. Well, do we even have a good antivirus software put together? We're going to show you, the multiple options out there. I think I've even provided a few links on them so you can go forward. Most of them will have some free variation. Then they'll probably have more of an advanced, so essentially the price lining it. But do you have that antivirus put together? Not to mention, part of this with CMMC looks at the scheduling of it. At the minimum, you should be doing weekly antivirus scans. A good 360 setup may actually allow for you to have this in real time. Because speaking of the real-time malware scans, so viruses aren't, of course, the only form of malware out there, right? You got your worms, you got your Trojan horses. I guess even now they get the virus bombs, etc. So all of those forms of potential malware could be trying to infect us. And do you have your system to do real-time scanning? If so, once again, you set the feature for it, you allow it to auto update, and that auto update includes antivirus software and anything dealing with malware protection. It sits in the background, you don't have to worry about it, you can go on and do your actual business. And of course, the last point deals with the VPN, so the virtual private network, right? We see this a lot of times if employees are operating from home. Yes, normally if you are on a secure facility, you don't really have to worry about it so much, it's probably been already established. But we start to see the issues when people are working from home on their own devices, the BYOD. Well, how proper is this established from a security setup on said device? Are they using a VPN? Like here at USCA, when we're operating outside, we're doing something secure, they're always suggesting like, hey, use Pulse Secure. I've used Pulse Secure myself, works really well. There's plenty of options for VPNs that we're going to talk about. Are you utilizing one for your business? And I strongly encourage that, even if you're not just working from home, have that on your main facility. It's going to keep you in compliance with CMMC Level 1, not to mention you can sleep a little easier. It's offering another barrier between you and a potential cyber threat. Now, as I promised, we've shown some options out there on the VPNs. Some of them, I'm sure you've seen even from like YouTube ads, NordVPN's putting a lot of things out there. I mentioned Pulse Secure. I always laugh at Hide My Ass. It's not maybe a formal VPN from the way we think of installing the program, but it is essentially trying to give you some further protection, F-Secure out there. You probably notice there is one missing, and that's McAfee. Anything what we're talking about, there is a reasoning behind that. McAfee will not be considered an acceptable version by any form of the government, mostly due to its Russian ties that they see as that being a potential security threat. But these others are probably going to be good in compliance for that. Check them out, see what you like, and then go forward on it. Now, what about the antivirus options? You'll notice a few of these are probably going to be familiar, like F-Secure. We just saw that before. Norton, Bitdefender, etc. Once again, they've got free variations. Look to see if you want to upgrade maybe into a better package. Speaking of Norton, Norton has their 360 variation where not only does it include antivirus, it's real-time malware. You can have a smart firewall. It has the VPN included, and not to mention you can pay extra for a LifeLock protection. So that way you've got real-time monitoring, perhaps making sure people aren't manipulating your credit score, stealing your identity. Yeah, I don't know about you, but it seems like a nice deal. In terms of the budget, right? Some of these things you'll set up from day one and you're good. Some of these you'll have to continuously pay for, right? So that's why we were saying from a cost perspective, we're trying to get 500, give you a range. If you want to advance in the higher features, that could easily go over that, but it's about what you're seeking for the business. All right, so what have we established as some top to-dos. Notice, we talked about ransomware being an issue. Well, shoot, are you actually backing up your information? Not from even the ransomware perspective, but also too, employees can accidentally delete the wrong thing. That may not be a true cyber threat, but theoretically that can hurt your business if it is very pertinent data. We mentioned the multi-factor authentication ties into the passphrases. We talked about using the virtual private network. Look at this, anti-malware, the software patches, auto update will do that. The last point is something that is going to require some initiative on your part and a buy-in of your employees. And that's actually testing and educating yourself. Stay up to date on the various cyber components, whether that's the evolution of CMMC, looking at, what are the newest attacks that happen. You can read articles to see what the new patches are actually protecting against. I always laugh because Earl used to test this even on us, on our network. And to see, it turns out he was throwing out a fake link and see, how many things would actually go out there and, would we actually click it? And on those cases, it made us think and say, all right, yeah, this is something that everybody needs to be thinking about. And so test that with your business. There are great tools that allow you to do so. There's known as IRPs, incident response plans. You have an incident response team. You can go through the various government agencies and they will actually have a plethora of resources for here. We'd actually strongly encourage you to work with us because we would love to help make sure that you are actually following the fundamentals of cyber hygiene, protecting yourself as much as possible. Now, what about the future of CMMC? So I told you 1.0 is gone. They're debuting the 2.0. Clearly, they're going to get the public feedback to see is this going to be finalized version. All right. And as you can see here, I mentioned with DoD, initially they were saying, hey, that a certain contract would require not only the prime contractor, but the subcontractor to be in compliance with a certain level. That probably is still going to be in some form true. So be ready for that. There is a new webinar that's going to talk further about this. I think on the 18th, either Earl and I will be present on that. So that way we can maybe have some new information from our clients. But I will tell you this, it'll be probably a while before anything's set in stone. And the certification path. So it moved from third party, it's probably going to go to self-assessment for level 1, which is what most businesses are probably going to be dealing with. But naturally, it will evolve. Regardless, though, the fundamentals of this are not going to change. You notice level 1 is still 17 steps. Okay. It's not rocket science. Therefore, you can always see in real time. It's not hypothetical whether or not your business is actually in compliance with this. Hey, something a little easier to sleep at night. And what about additional resources? As you can see, these are various pages going on from the North Star model, and this is actually with the Americas SBDC. And so if I'm not mistaken, we're putting together our own cyber page on this case. We've been in talks with a lot of the other SBDCs around the country, from Delaware to Michigan, et cetera. Delaware's got a great page out there. I think the state director up there actually came from a strong cyber background. So they've been making some great initiatives. We've been getting a lot of feedback because this is something recently we've got into. It was great because it was during COVID times when everybody was going remote. Thus, cybercrime was escalating, and hence why our need to give this to our clients and the public just became of greater importance. So here's my questions page. I'm sure that we probably have a few through the chat as we've been moving along. We're at 11:49, 11:50. That's great timing, gives us some time to talk about things. As I told you, a disclaimer, I'm not a cyber expert, but I really enjoy going through this with my clients because it's something they can actually not only make themselves feel better about from a cyber standpoint, but two, it raises questions about how they train employees, how their digital infrastructure is actually established, et cetera. If you do want to register for a client, the easiest way to do so is actually going through this link. It'll take you 5 minutes. It'll ask you information about who you are. Do you have a company? If not, you can put not in business yet. It'll ask you what you're looking for in terms of assistance. You'll sign a user agreement, et cetera. And at that point, we'll be able to process it. Right now in my office, we are seeing everybody pretty much through Zoom, but it's been great because we've been able to share real time in these elements. Of course, if we have something more secure, naturally we can make accommodations for physical, consultations in person. We go from 30 minutes, get a framework of what you're doing, and then we move forward based on those needs. So feel free to send me an email at any time. I'd be happy to. And I don't know if I mentioned in the beginning, so I want to reiterate this because I know Sarah wanted me to do so. We're going to be sending out surveys about this. All right. this webinar. We really want your feedback. It's the first time we've actually ran it of necessarily the series. I've done some cyber things here and there, but with the focus on CMMC, this is our first merry-go-round in this case. We'd love to address that feedback, look for convergences of data, and then implement said feedback moving forward. So if I'm looking in the chat, Earl's got a point. Watch the badges don't end up in the pictures. They could allow them to be duplicated. Absolutely. And especially if people are even using the case of biometrics, right? To go a step further, whether that's actually, your thumbprint, going on with your eye, etc. So yes, Earl, that is a brilliant point to put out there. Things can indeed be duplicated. So Sarah, I'm not seeing any other questions in here. I just wanted to verify that on my end.
Yeah, I don't think we have anything in the chat, but we can keep it open for another minute or two if anybody's trying to type anything.
Certainly. Like I want to reiterate from my beginning slide, this is not rocket science. It's not meant to scare you. It's to make you think further about some of these details, and we'd be happy to set up calls. Earl and I generally tag team on a first cyber call. We'll actually use that as work through the workbooks, the self-assessment right there, helping you look at the various questions. And in that case, essentially what we're doing is almost inventory your business from a cyber perspective. See where some potential vulnerabilities exist. We can offer up some solutions and hopefully get your business in a better position. So thank you so much for attending. This webinar is being recorded, so Sarah will be able to probably show you the link on our on our main site under training. We have a lot of recordings on YouTube. I don't know if Sarah, do you plan to send out the presentation for everybody who submits feedback on the survey?
Yes, we'll have the presentation and the video emailed to everyone that attended today, along with that survey for them to give us their feedback.
Great. Once again, thank you so much for taking time out of your day on a Wednesday to come join us. We certainly appreciate it. We hope you've taken away some valuable input. Feel free to send me any questions further about the CMMC guidance, and we will do our best to assist making your business feel a little more secure. Thanks again. Everybody have a great day.